today we are going to review The Evil Within, released in 2014 on PlayStation, Xbox, and PC, created by the famous Shinji Mikami. So, let's get started. The Evil Within is not a game that relies on cheap jump scares. It's driven by a slow, sustained, and deeply pervasive sense of dread that sets your mind racing at every crunch of glass beneath your feet and every distant drone from an unseen enemy. Much of this tension is thanks to the game's striking use of atmosphere, so gloomy and impactful it often borders on suffocating. But it's also a treatment to an action heavy combat system whose scant ammunition and immediate threat of death is just as demanding as it is satisfying. Were it not for the occasional stumble into moments of the immense frustration and an aimless, sputtering story, the evil within could have been something truly great. What's left, though, is an uneven but ultimately captivating ode to the glory days of survival horror. The evil within is aesthetically, functionally, and spiritually in step with director Shinji Mikami's last foray into the genre, the iconic Resident Evil 4. It's not simply a rehash of that game, though, as Mikami and his new development studio Tango Gameworks have delivered a harder, bleaker game this time around. At the center of it all is Sebastian Castellanos, a detective called in to investigate a vicious collection of murders at a local mental hospital. The brief preamble leading up to this investigation is all the calm the evil within can muster, because from then on, Castellanos is sent tumbling through a twisted and only occasionally coherent story involving supernatural apparitions, gruesome monsters, and a seemingly infinite series of nightmarish backdrops. When Castellanos and his partners are summoned to the scene of a bloody mass murder, they find themselves separated and teleported into a twisted version of reality, where regular humans are turned into horrifying mutated killers. While the setup allows for a more psychological bend than many modern survival horror games, I can't say that the plot of The Evil Within ever really pulled me in. Much of the blame for that rests on the shoulders of the dull leading man and thin supporting cast. Sebastian is a genetic, gruff, seen some shit, haunted by his past horror protagonist through and through. I made educated guesses about his backstory 20 minutes into the game. They were all spot on, one by one revealed as twists hours down the road. That's not bragging either. I am no great narrative psychic. The plot and especially the characterization are just that predictable. Sebastian's partner Joseph and rookie in training Kidman have a little more depth but are so underutilized that it's hard to catch it. The evil within has an unending passion for again without warning. The evil within has an unending passion for reuniting Sebastian with his colleagues for half a chapter or so, only to rip them apart again without warning. Kidman will be starring in two already announced DLC packs for the game. Perhaps those will end up being the ideal evil within experience. The lack of ceremony behind Kidman and Joseph's coming and going hints at a bigger problem with pacing throughout the evil within. The game is split into chapters, but there's no real arc to these segments. Boss fights are peppered throughout, sometimes at the end, sometimes in the middle, sometimes multiple bosses per chapter, thrown at the player like a gauntlet. There's no discernible rhyme or reason, no build to climax, just seemingly random jumps back and forth between silent exploration and violent conflict. It's not a good story, nor is it self aware, lacking any trance of that cheeky, almost a Jill sandwich charm of early survivor horror games. It is genuinely, earnestly bad. Castellanos is a wooden and thoroughly uninterested protagonist, a gruff cop with a dark past whose in game journal actually contains the line, I have to say strong, but it's so easy to drown my thoughts in whiskey. Then there's the overarching plot, so maddening and slipshod with its constant jumps in and out, Castellanos' tormented visions, that this narrative trickery becomes routine, even numbing in a way. It's a saw whose teeth have been worn down by overuse. So the world lacks context, but it doesn't lack impact. The Evil Within is a horror experience, but on such an outstanding foundation. The chilling use of lights and shadow, the menacing audio flourishes that merely traversing its environments is enough to make your heart skip a few beats. Whether it has you exploring a derelict hospital ward splattered with blood and overturned wheelchairs, a ravaged urban center where aquatic monsters patrol its flooded streets, or even that most weathered of survival horror settings, the creepy mansion. The Evil Within transports you through a diverse assortment of places with one theme tying them all together, an absolutely terrifying sense of atmosphere. There's more to contend with an eerie sights and sounds, of course. The evil within is full of grotesque creatures who relish every opportunity to rend you limb from limb. There are vaguely human monsters that populate early chapters, wielding hatchets and hurling sticks of dynamite like supercharged zombies. But as the game wears on, you are pitted against increasingly nasty and challenging foes. But no matter where you are in the game's lengthy story, death is never far around the corner. The evil within is a brutal experience where the slightest lapse in concentration can turn you into a pool of viscera on the ground. As a result, caution and patience are your greatest allies in the fight of survival. Every handgun round feels precious. Every healing syringe feels like it could be a last. But for as stingy as the game is with its resources, it's also rich in choices. Do you use that one remaining bullet to go for a headshot or shoot your foe in the leg before rushing up and burning it with a match? Do you throw a bottle to lure that creature towards a tripwire booby trap or risk dismantling the trap yourself and using those parts to craft a new crossbow bolt? The whole game is littered with these tense moment to moment decisions, always forcing you to be creative and resourceful with the way you approach each fight. But when your craftiness pays off and you manage to escape through an encounter with your body intact, the payoff is immense. That challenge scales well too. Part of the enjoyment of slowly searching through each environment is an allure of finding green gel, which functions as a currency for the game's extensive upgrade system. It's here that you can choose from options like increasing your sprint time, carrying more shotgun shells, or even reducing the sway on your handgun reticule. It's a great system that allows you to feel like you're adequately prepared for the ferocious monsters waiting for you in the game's later stages, but on your own terms and with your own strategy in mind. Green gel isn't so abundant that you can upgrade everything. You really need to pick a path and stick with it. The evil within does a remarkable job of pushing you to your limit, but there are moments when it crosses the line and the experience suffers for it. One of the biggest culprits is the autosave system, a finicky and unpredictable thing that doesn't seem to behave by any consistent logic. It generally records your progress after major encounters, but there are times it saves your game mid battle for no apparent reason, and others when it's been so long since you saw that little icon on the screen that you feel as though you are crawling through the desert in search of water, cursing the sun for its abject cruelty. You often find yourself playing through certain stretches again and again for no clear reason. The game's striking atmosphere becoming a little less impressive each time through. There is a manual save system also, but it's generally only accessible at the start of each chapter, meaning the further you proceed, the more you surrender yourself to the whims of the autosave gods. A similar issue plagues some of the boss battles. The bosses are suitably terrifying, twisted monsters capable of making you shiver at the mere sight of them, and some of them make for great encounters, forcing you to take the same wits and creativity you have been refining in basic combat and dial them up to a whole new level. But others require you to perform these very specific, very obtuse secondary goals hidden somewhere in the environment. It's these fights that you need to plow through over and over and over until you figure out the right process. A core made even more tedious by the game's glacial load times and habit of repeating the same boss introduction cinematic. Other moments of frustration pop up throughout the campaign. Invisible enemies, a recurring character who appears from nowhere to kill you instantly, which feel like clumsy missteps in an otherwise satisfying fight for survival. But it's a fight that anyone with a tough stomach should take on, because for as much as the evil within does stumble, it always seems to recover. What it does at its core, it does so well that all those issues floating on the periphery eventually fade away to reveal a satisfying, if slightly blemished, return to classic survival horror. My favorite parts of the evil within were exploring these environments, watching them morph around me, avoiding traps, and searching for secrets within them. Things were at their spookiest and most satisfying in these quieter segments with limited enemy numbers. The game also encourages and rewards thorough explorers with more of that ever rare ammo plus green goo that the main character uses to progress in the game's well developed skill upgrade system. That upgrade system is one of the few things that kept me happy throughout The Evil Within. In addition to buffing basic character stats such as total health and melee damage, each individual weapon can be upgraded in numerous categories. Each upgrade felt like a notable improvement, and there were far more than I could grab in one playthrough. There's a new Game Plus option that allows you to carry your upgrades over to future playthroughs as well. I suspect the general enjoyability of the game will be improved by being overpowered in those runs. I'm still questioning whether I'll make that second pass though. The Evil Within has great moments where the excellent combat and creepy environment design come together. But those moments are fleeting, inevitably sapped of their delightful terror by design choices that feel trapped in the glory days of a decade ago. There's something to be said for respecting your past successes and building off of them. But the evil within is only ever completely successful at half of that equation. The Evil Within was the most overhyped horror game of 2014. Everybody wouldn't stop talking about this game, just like Watch Dogs and Destiny. The game started to got negative response from some people when it came out. The boss fights in the game are challenging to the point where I almost pull my hair out by the hard boss fights. But the game wants to challenge you and tries not to make it easy. And when you do kill the boss, you feel a badass and a sense of relief. And I can't fault the game for doing that. The main character of the game has to be the most blandest person on the face of earth. He's like the perfect cop that can't get hurt because he's the perfect badass kind of person. I have played many survival horror games over the years, but the two franchises most people know are Resident Evil and Silent Hill. This game does have elements of both of those franchises, but has enough of its own charm to stand strongly on its own merits. Though not perfect by any means, however, neither are many of the games in the Resident Evil and Silent Hill series. I prefer Silent Hill myself, and I would say this game has more elements from that franchise than Resident Evil. Evil Within is in a way similar to Soul experiences. Here too, you will need to level up and take your time to carefully explore everything, looking for items and ammo, and you need to be prepared for the boss fights. Just like in Silent Hill, you shouldn't waste your ammo on regular foes, and to enjoy it, you need to know how to play it in the right way. Otherwise, you'll hate this game, find it extremely hard. There are also new traits that mark the evil within as a distinct proposition from the schlock horror series with which Mikami made his name. The psychological horror that runs spine like through each of the game's 16 lingering chapters is new. The unnerving props and characters are borrowed as much from the work of film director Takashi Miike as from Mikami's favorite George Romero. The Evil Within knows how to make you sweat. Tango Gameworks' disgusting debut outing will leave you teetering on the precipice of failure with every twisted encounter, causing you to curse your shortage of resources or your character's lack of superhuman strength. This is a game that, like its survivor horror superiors, isn't satisfied with slowly whittling away at your senses of safety. It wants you to erode it at every opportunity. And while this pervading sense of danger does result in some controller damaging difficulty spikes, the game certainly succeeds at keeping you on the edge of your seat. Just try not to fall.